was a busy evening at one of the city's most elegant restaurants. The lights were soft, creating a warm glow that reflected off polished wood and sparkling glassware. The air carried the delicate aroma of fresh flowers mixed with the rich scent of food being carefully prepared in the kitchen. Guests were scattered around, some in quiet conversation, others laughing lightly, enjoying their evening in the kind of place where every detail was meant to feel perfect. The clinking of cutlery, soft footsteps of servers, and occasional murmur of music in the background gave the restaurant a life of its own. Among the staff was a young waiter who had worked there for several months. He moved efficiently between tables, balancing trays and taking orders with a polite smile. His uniform was neat, pressed perfectly, and his shoes shone as if he had just polished them. Many guests noticed him because of his attention to detail and how he seemed to anticipate their needs before they even asked. He was quiet, almost unassuming, never trying to draw attention. But those who watched closely could see a calm confidence in the way he carried himself. That evening, a wealthy woman arrived with a small group of friends. She was used to attention, to people noticing her presence wherever she went. Her dress was elegant, her jewelry sparkling under the soft lights, and her laughter carried across the room as she spoke with her friends. She had a sharp mind and a playful streak, and she often enjoyed moments that broke the ordinary rhythm of her luxurious life. That night, as they were seated in a prime corner of the restaurant with a clear view of the grand piano, she looked around the room with a mischievous glint in her eye. The grand piano stood in the corner, polished black gleaming under the soft overhead lights. Its presence was subtle yet commanding, a centerpiece that added a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. It was not unusual for guests to request a song, but usually the piano was played by a professional hired by the restaurant. Tonight, however, the wealthy woman had a playful idea. She noticed the waiter moving nearby, carrying a tray of drinks with practiced ease, and a thought struck her. With a smile that was more teasing than kind, she leaned slightly forward and called him over. The waiter approached, polite and attentive, ready to take any order or respond to any request. The woman's friends watched, curious about what she might say next. "Why don't you play the piano for us?" she said, her tone light, almost joking. Her words were not meant to be taken seriously. In her mind, it was a harmless joke, a way to entertain herself and her friends for a few minutes. She expected him to look surprised, maybe even uncomfortable, and politely decline. The waiter paused for a moment as if considering her words. He did not laugh or appear embarrassed. Instead, he offered a small, polite smile and replied calmly, "I can do that." The simplicity of his response caught her off guard. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. She had expected resistance, but instead there was quiet confidence. The corners of her mouth twitched slightly, unsure if she should laugh or be impressed. Her friends leaned in, some raising their eyebrows, all intrigued by the unexpected response. He walked toward the piano without a word, his movements smooth and purposeful. Guests nearby glanced in his direction, curious about the situation. A few smiled politely, thinking it might be a casual performance, nothing more. The wealthy woman leaned back in her chair, folding her hands lightly, expecting to be entertained by a clumsy attempt at playing. She was prepared for awkward notes, missed chords, and perhaps a quick, embarrassed retreat back to his waiting duties. That was the image she had created in her mind. A little joke at the expense of someone who was supposed to be serving, not performing. As he reached the piano, he lifted the lid, and the polished keys gleamed under the lights. He positioned himself carefully on the bench, taking a deep breath, almost as if he were stepping into another world. There was a stillness in the room now, a quiet pause as the regular rhythm of chatter and movement slowed. Even the kitchen staff, busy with orders and plates, seemed to notice the shift. It was as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. He placed his hands on the keys and pressed the first note. It was clear, rich, and full. The sound seemed to hang in the air, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. People stopped mid-conversation, forks hovering in the air as the note resonated with a depth that was unexpected. A few guests exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. It was not just a simple note played mechanically. It carried emotion, intention, and control. The waiter began to play again, moving into a melody that was more complex than anyone anticipated. His fingers moved gracefully across the keys, precise and confident. as if they had been trained for this moment over many years. The music filled the space between tables, weaving through the chatter and clinking of glasses, commanding attention effortlessly. Guests stopped what they were doing, drawn to the unexpected performance. The wealthy woman's friends leaned in, whispering to each other, "Did he just—" The words were unfinished, left hanging in the air, because even they could not fully process what they were hearing. She herself felt a mix of emotions. The initial amusement she had felt melted into astonishment. There was no clumsiness, no hesitation, only skill and grace. Her joke had backfired in the most remarkable way. She had expected a little entertainment, a playful moment to amuse herself and her friends. Instead, she was witnessing something extraordinary, something she had never expected to see from someone she assumed was only a waiter. The quiet confidence, the precise movements, and the richness of the music left her speechless. Guests from other tables started to notice as well. Heads turned, conversations paused, and people subtly shifted closer to catch a better view of the pianist. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the moment silently, careful not to disrupt the unexpected performance. The waiter continued to play without acknowledging the growing attention. He did not smile or seek applause. He simply allowed the music to flow naturally from his fingers, letting the notes speak for themselves. The wealthy woman watched, a mix of embarrassment and admiration washing over her. Her initial laughter felt foolish now. She realized she had underestimated someone based solely on their role, on their appearance, on the surface image they presented. The young waiter, quiet and unassuming, had revealed a part of himself that no one expected, a talent hidden in plain sight. She leaned back in her chair, quietly reflecting on how often people judged others too quickly, how easily assumptions could lead to missed truths. For the waiter, the moment was familiar, yet private. He had spent years practicing piano, often in solitude, honing his skill while the world saw only the uniform he wore, the trays he carried, the polite smile he offered. He did not play for recognition or praise. He played because it was part of who he was, a personal expression that could not be hidden even when he tried. That night, by chance, the world got a glimpse of what he had kept to himself, and the response was immediate, though he remained modest and composed. As the first few pieces concluded, there was a pause. The room, which had been quietly absorbing the music, erupted in soft applause and murmurs of admiration. The wealthy woman, now fully aware of the impact of her joke, felt a strange mix of humility and awe. She had intended to create a moment of light amusement, yet she had stumbled into witnessing something remarkable. Her friends looked at her, some laughing softly, acknowledging the irony, others simply amazed. Unable to take their eyes off the pianist, the waiter, acknowledging the applause with a small nod, returned to his station. His movements were calm, almost routine, as he resumed taking orders and serving dishes. Yet the energy in the restaurant had shifted. Guests who had been focused on their meals were now attentive, engaged, and inspired by the unexpected performance. Conversations picked up again, but there was a newfound respect in the air, an unspoken recognition of talent and the stories hidden within ordinary lives. The wealthy woman, sitting quietly for a moment, reflected on the lesson she had received. She realized that life often hid its most extraordinary moments in the most ordinary places. A person could appear unremarkable at first glance, yet hold a depth of talent, skill, or courage that could astonish the world if given the chance. Her joke, meant to entertain, had instead revealed a truth she could not ignore. Appearances were often deceiving, and true talent could not be hidden forever. As the evening continued, she found herself observing the waiter with new eyes. She noticed the way he moved with purpose, the calm efficiency in his service, the polite attentiveness that had always been part of his character. Yet now she saw something more. A strength, a quiet confidence, a hidden brilliance that had been waiting for the right moment to shine. She could not help but feel a sense of admiration, mixed with humility for having misjudged him initially. In that moment, the restaurant was no longer just a place of dining. It became a stage for revelation, for breaking assumptions, for witnessing the unexpected unfold. The guests, the staff, and the wealthy woman herself were all part of a small yet profound experience, one that would linger in memory long after the final notes had faded. The young waiter, unaware of the lasting impression he had made, continued his work quietly and unassumingly. embodying the lesson that talent and character often reveal themselves in ways the world least expects. The night had begun as ordinary, a routine of fine dining and polite conversation. By a simple, playful suggestion, it had transformed into an evening of astonishment and reflection. The wealthy woman's joke had been turned on its head, revealing not only the hidden talent of a young man who had served unnoticed for months, but also a deeper truth about judgment, humility, and the extraordinary that often lies beneath the surface. By the time the evening drew to a close, the music had stopped, the applause had faded, and the guests returned to their routines. Yet the memory of that performance lingered. The wealthy woman left with a quiet respect, a lesson learned in humility, and a story that would stay with her. The young waiter, having shared his gift in the most unexpected way, had not only surprised the room but had subtly changed the way those who witnessed it would look at the world around them. Talent, courage, and authenticity had spoken louder than wealth, status, or assumptions. And in that soft, glowing restaurant, a small, unassuming man had left an indelible mark on everyone who had the privilege to see it. After the first few notes, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted completely. What had begun as a playful joke was now a moment of awe. Guests who had been quietly dining suddenly found themselves holding their forks in midair, listening intently. The music seemed to float through the room, filling every corner with a rich, emotional sound that no one had expected from a young waiter who had only moments ago been carrying trays of drinks and taking orders. People leaned closer, as if drawn magnetically toward the piano. Some eyes widened in disbelief. Others whispered softly to their companions, unsure if they had imagined the talent they were hearing. The wealthy woman who had made the joke could feel her face warming with embarrassment. She had thought this would be funny, a small moment to entertain her friends. And now it was she who was being entertained, completely unprepared for the depth of what she was witnessing. The waiter did not rush the music. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully placed, showing control and understanding far beyond what anyone had anticipated. He played a piece that was both complex and emotionally moving. There were moments of quiet, tender sound that seemed to touch something deep inside the listeners, and moments of powerful, energetic chords that made people sit forward in their chairs, completely captivated. It was clear that this was not just a casual skill. This was the work of someone who had dedicated years of practice to the art of music. Some guests began to film on their phones, trying not to disturb the natural flow of the performance. They whispered to each other in disbelief. "He's amazing," one guest murmured. "I can't believe he's a waiter," said another. The words hung in the air, not as a judgment, but as a mixture of surprise and admiration. It was rare to see someone exceed expectations in such a dramatic way, and even rarer for it to happen so unexpectedly, in a place where people were used to seeing only the surface of life. The wealthy woman's friends were equally stunned. Some laughed nervously at the irony of the situation, while others were silent, completely absorbed in the music. They glanced at each other and then back at the waiter, as if trying to reconcile the polite, efficient server they had seen just moments ago with the extraordinary performer at the piano. The contrast was striking, and it made the moment all the more memorable. The waiter's expression was calm, almost serene. He did not seem to notice the growing attention around him. He was focused entirely on the music, letting his fingers glide over the keys with precision and ease. Every note told a story, every chord conveyed emotion. It was not about showing off or impressing anyone. It was about sharing a part of himself that had long been private, hidden beneath the daily routines of his job. The piano was his voice, and now the world was listening. The wealthy woman who had initiated the challenge was having a quiet moment of reflection. She realized that she had underestimated the young man before her. Her assumption had been based on his job, his role in the restaurant, and perhaps even his appearance. She had expected a performance that would be amusing at best and awkward at worst. What she had received instead was a display of talent, dedication, and passion that left her completely humbled. She could feel her pride shifting into respect, admiration, and even a touch of guilt for having judged someone too quickly. Guests from nearby tables were now fully engaged. Conversations had stopped, and all eyes were on the piano. Some had their mouths slightly open, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others tapped their feet quietly, absorbed in the rhythm and flow of the music. The entire restaurant had become a shared space of wonder, where differences in wealth, status, and expectations seemed to fade away in the presence of pure talent. As the waiter continued to play, the wealthy woman's initial embarrassment began to soften into genuine curiosity. She wanted to know more about him, about how someone who appeared so ordinary in daily life could possess such extraordinary skill. There was a lesson forming in her mind, one that she could feel taking shape even as the music filled the room. Appearances could be deceiving, and true ability often lies hidden beneath layers of expectation and assumption. The music reached a point where it became almost cinematic in its effect. The soft notes seemed to weave a story of quiet struggle and determination, while the louder, more powerful chords suggested triumph, joy, and unspoken strength. It was as though the young waiter had poured all of his life experience into the performance. Every emotion he had felt, the quiet moments of doubt, the hours of solitary practice, the small victories that no one had ever seen, was embedded in the sound of the piano. The audience could feel it even without knowing the story behind it. Some guests whispered to each other about how rare it was to witness something so raw and authentic. They commented on the contrast between his daily role as a waiter and his ability to command attention through music. Many realized that they had been quick to judge, assuming that a person's position or appearance could define their capabilities. Now they were reminded that life often contains surprises, that hidden talents can exist where no one expects to find them, and that humility is often paired with brilliance in the most unexpected places. The wealthy woman herself was lost in thought, her initial amusement completely replaced by a sense of wonder. She could not stop thinking about the way he had accepted her joke with calm confidence, as if he had already anticipated the moment and was ready to rise to it. She had expected hesitation, perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, she found grace, skill, and an unshakable composure that left her reconsidering everything she thought she knew about people like him. The waiter finished one piece and let his hands hover over the keys for a moment, creating a gentle pause that added drama to the performance. Then he began another piece, this one faster, more energetic, showing a different side of his talent. The notes flowed rapidly, yet with perfect control, dancing across the piano and filling the room with a lively, joyful sound. Guests smiled, tapped their fingers along to the rhythm, and felt a sense of excitement building. It was as though the music had lifted the atmosphere, transforming the restaurant from a simple dining space into a theater of emotion and experience. The wealthy woman watched, captivated, and began to reflect on her own actions. She had approached the situation with a sense of superiority, expecting amusement and laughter at someone else's expense. Now she was confronted with the reality that her assumptions had been entirely wrong. She felt a twinge of embarrassment, but also a strong sense of admiration and respect for the young man who had so effortlessly transformed her joke into a moment of beauty. Her friends, too, were watching with newfound awareness. Some laughed softly at their own surprise, realizing how quickly they had made assumptions about the waiter's abilities. Others were quiet, listening and reflecting on the lessons hidden in the music. They were witnessing not just a performance, but a story of hidden talent, of dedication, of quiet strength, and of the unexpected ways in which people can reveal their true selves when given the opportunity. The young waiter continued, seemingly oblivious to the attention and whispers. He played with an elegance that seemed natural, unforced, yet undeniably powerful. Each note carried a sense of history, of experience, and of personal expression. The music was more than entertainment. It was a statement, a quiet declaration of his identity, his skill, and his ability to rise above expectations. The wealthy woman felt a growing sense of humility. She realized that her joke had unintentionally revealed a truth she had never considered, that life is full of people whose talents go unseen because others judge too quickly, because appearances are mistaken for reality. She began to understand that true greatness often hides in plain sight, waiting for a moment when it can shine. This young man, who had served her with a polite smile just minutes ago, was now teaching her a lesson she would not forget. The audience was now completely immersed. Guests had stopped all other activities, their attention fully captured by the young man at the piano. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, studying the way his fingers moved, the way he seemed to communicate emotion through the instrument. The energy in the room had shifted. There was a sense of collective respect, of shared astonishment, of recognition that something extraordinary was happening before their very eyes. The wealthy woman, seated in her chair, felt a mixture of emotions, humility, admiration, and a growing appreciation for the depth of human potential. She realized that her joke, meant to entertain, had inadvertently created an opportunity for her and everyone present to witness something remarkable. The young waiter had turned what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a display of grace, skill, and emotional power. As the piece drew to a close, the final notes lingered in the air, soft and resonant. A hush fell over the room for a brief moment before applause erupted. Guests clapped politely, then more enthusiastically, their admiration and respect for the performer growing with each beat. The wealthy woman joined in, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. She had been completely wrong to underestimate him, and now she felt a sense of honor to have witnessed his talent firsthand. The waiter, as if sensing it was time, rose from the piano, gave a modest bow, and returned to his station. He did not bask in the applause or seek acknowledgement. He continued his duties with the same calm efficiency he had shown all evening, but the energy in the restaurant had changed. Guests looked at him differently now, with a quiet respect, an awareness that they had witnessed something rare and special. The wealthy woman remained seated for a moment longer, reflecting on the experience. Her joke had been playful, perhaps even slightly thoughtless, but the outcome had been far beyond anything she could have imagined. She felt a subtle but important shift in her understanding, not just of this young man, but of people in general. She realized that assumptions could never capture the depth of an individual, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden where least expected. As the evening continued, the music and the moment lingered in everyone's mind. Guests returned to their meals, but their attention remained heightened, their awareness sharpened. They had been reminded that talent, passion, and dedication could be found in anyone, anywhere, and that humility and respect were essential to truly understanding the people around them. By the time the night ended, the young waiter had returned to his regular duties, and the wealthy woman had left with a new perspective. The experience had begun as a joke, a light moment meant to amuse, but it had transformed into something profound. It was a story of hidden talent, of assumptions challenged, of respect earned, and of the quiet power that can emerge when a person is given the chance to reveal their true self. And in the quiet corners of the restaurant, long after the music had stopped and the guests had departed, the impression of that evening remained, an unforgettable reminder that extraordinary moments often appear when we least expect them, and that even the simplest acts can reveal the hidden brilliance within someone who, at first glance, might seem ordinary. The restaurant stayed unusually quiet even after the waiter finished his performance. For a few seconds, no one seemed to know what to do or say. The air felt heavy, but not in an uncomfortable way, more like everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Then came the sound of clapping, gentle at first, then louder, spreading across the room. It wasn't the kind of polite applause given to a background musician. It was heartfelt. People were clapping because they had been moved, truly moved. The young waiter stood, gave a small, humble nod, and stepped away from the piano. He didn't look around for attention, and he didn't seem to expect praise. He simply returned to his regular duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That humility made the moment even more powerful. Guests kept watching him, whispering quietly to each other, wondering how someone so talented could go unnoticed for so long. The wealthy woman, who had started it all, sat still for a moment. Her heart was still racing and she wasn't sure how to feel. A part of her was deeply impressed, another part ashamed. She had made the comment as a joke, expecting a moment of laughter at someone else's expense. But instead, she had uncovered something beautiful, something real. It was humbling in a way she hadn't felt before. Her friends were still talking about it, some replaying short clips they had recorded on their phones. The woman next to her said softly, "I can't believe he plays like that. He could be on a stage not serving food." Another one replied, "It's almost unbelievable. How does someone like him end up here?" The wealthy woman didn't respond right away. She looked over at the young waiter as he poured water for another table, his movement steady and polite. There was grace in the way he worked, just as there had been in the way he played the piano. For the first time, she looked at him without the lens of superiority that money or status often created. She saw him simply as a person who had dreams, struggles, and an extraordinary gift. After a few moments, she called him over. He approached with his usual calm expression, his hands neatly folded in front of him. She smiled, trying to find the right words. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The waiter hesitated, his eyes dropping slightly before he answered. "I studied music for a few years," he said in a modest tone. "I used to play in small places, but life got complicated and I had to focus on work." Her friends listened intently, drawn in by his calm honesty. "Complicated how?" one of them asked, leaning forward with curiosity. The waiter smiled faintly, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. "My family needed help. I had to put my dreams aside for a while. The piano was always my passion, but it couldn't pay the bills." The wealthy woman felt a pang of guilt at his words. Here she was, living a life of luxury, never having to worry about bills or sacrifices, and yet she had mocked someone whose only mistake was being in a situation he couldn't control. She realized in that moment how easy it was to take life's blessings for granted, and how often people looked down on others without understanding the paths they had walked. Her voice softened. "You should be playing somewhere people can hear you," she said sincerely. "You have a gift." He nodded politely but didn't say much. "Thank you, ma'am. I just play when I can. Sometimes it's enough to know I still have it." That line struck her deeply. Enough to know I still have it. It was simple, but it carried weight. It spoke of someone who had accepted life's difficulties with grace. Someone who hadn't given up on his dreams even if he couldn't live them every day. Throughout the evening, guests continued to glance at him, some stopping him briefly to express admiration or ask questions. A few even requested that he play again, though he politely declined, explaining that it wouldn't be appropriate while he was working. Still, the mood in the restaurant remained changed. There was a sense of warmth and respect that hadn't been there before. When the wealthy woman and her friends finished their meal, she left a generous tip, far more than she usually did. But it wasn't just money she wanted to give. She paused before leaving and said softly to the waiter, "You reminded us all of something important tonight." "Thank you." He smiled, nodded slightly, and replied, "I'm glad you enjoyed it." After she left, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the night felt different. The other staff members couldn't stop talking about it. The head waiter approached him later and said, half joking, "You might have just become the most famous person in this restaurant." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I don't think so. I just played." But the truth was, people had noticed. One of the guests who had filmed his performance uploaded the video online later that night. They added a simple caption, "Waiter shocks restaurant with stunning piano performance." Within hours, it started spreading. The melody, the story, the surprise, all of it struck a chord with people. By morning, the video had thousands of views. Meanwhile, the wealthy woman couldn't get the experience out of her head. She replayed the moment again and again in her mind. The sound of the music, the calm focus on his face, the humility in his words. It had touched her in a way she hadn't expected. She realized that true grace wasn't found in wealth or social status. It was found in kindness, passion, and quiet strength. The next day, she shared the video too, along with a heartfelt message. She didn't mention her original comment or how it had started, but she wrote about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, and not what they appear to be. Sometimes, she wrote, a person you overlook might be the most talented person in the room. Never judge a soul by their job or their uniform. Everyone carries something special inside them. Her post gained attention quickly. People praised her honesty and the message behind it, though few knew the full story of how the moment had come to be. Back at the restaurant, the young waiter continued working as usual. He didn't expect fame or recognition, but he did notice more customers looking at him differently. Some smiled warmly, others complimented his playing. Even the restaurant owner pulled him aside one afternoon and said, "You've given this place a new reputation. People are talking about us now. Maybe we should have a piano night every week, and you should be the one to play." He chuckled softly but didn't give a clear answer. He wasn't chasing attention. He only wanted to do what he loved in his own quiet way. But inside, he felt something shift. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not as a server, not as a background worker, but as himself, a musician, a dreamer, someone with something real to offer. A few evenings later, the wealthy woman returned to the restaurant, this time alone. When she saw him, she smiled warmly. "I wanted to apologize properly," she said softly. When I asked you to play that night, it wasn't kind of me. I thought I was being funny, but you showed me something I'll never forget. He looked slightly surprised, but his tone was gentle. You don't have to apologize. Maybe it was meant to happen that way. She nodded, her eyes softening. Maybe it was. But still, thank you for reminding me that everyone has a story. They shared a quiet smile. It wasn't awkward, just sincere. A small connection between two people who had learned something from each other in very different ways. As the days passed, the story continued to spread online. Local newspapers picked it up, calling it a beautiful reminder not to judge others. Some music lovers reached out, offering to help him connect with local performance spaces. Even a small community orchestra invited him to play as a guest for an upcoming event. At first, he was hesitant. He hadn't performed on a real stage in years, and the idea made him nervous. But then he remembered that night in the restaurant, the way people had listened, the way the music had spoken for him when words couldn't. He decided to accept. The wealthy woman attended the concert quietly, sitting among the audience without making her presence known. She wanted to see him not as a server, not as someone she had once underestimated, but as the artist he truly was. When he walked onto the stage, dressed simply but with quiet confidence, she felt a wave of emotion. He looked calm, ready, at peace. When he began to play, the same magic filled the room. The music was powerful but pure, filled with emotion that went beyond technique. Every note carried his journey, his sacrifices, his humility, his persistence. The audience listened in silence, and when the final note faded, they rose to their feet in applause. The wealthy woman felt tears forming in her eyes, not out of sadness, but gratitude. She was grateful to have been part of his story, even unintentionally. Grateful that her careless comment had led to something meaningful, something beautiful. After the performance, she didn't approach him. She didn't need to. The applause, the admiration, and the music itself said everything that words couldn't. That night, as the waiter-turned-musician walked home, he smiled quietly to himself. Life had taken unexpected turns, but in the end, his passion had found its way back to him. He had never planned for it to happen like this, but sometimes, fate has its own way of revealing what is meant to be. And somewhere in that same city, the wealthy woman sat by her window, replaying the memory of his music in her mind. It reminded her to stay humble, to listen more, to see beyond appearances. What had started as a thoughtless remark had become a turning point in both their lives. A reminder that respect, kindness, and understanding can change everything. The restaurant never forgot that night either. The piano became more than decoration. It became a symbol of hidden potential, of moments when life surprises you, and of how beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places. The sound of the final note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Then one by one, people began to clap. At first, it was just a few hesitant hands meeting softly. Then it grew louder and louder until the whole restaurant was filled with applause. Some even stood up from their seats, cheering, whistling, and clapping as if they had just witnessed a concert at a grand theater. The waiter slowly turned from the piano, his face calm, almost shy. He gave a small nod of appreciation, then quietly stood up and walked away from the piano as if nothing unusual had happened. He picked up his tray from the counter, ready to continue serving tables. The guests who had been dining moments ago now looked at him with wide eyes, whispering to each other in disbelief. The wealthy woman, who had started the whole thing as a joke, sat frozen for a few seconds. Her mouth was slightly open, her expression stunned. The playful arrogance she had earlier was gone. Now there was only silence and something that looked a lot like guilt on her face. Her friends beside her also looked awkward, shifting in their chairs, unsure what to say. The laughter that had filled their table earlier had completely disappeared. One of them finally broke the silence. "He plays like a professional," she whispered, her voice almost trembling. "Where did he learn that?" The rich woman didn't respond right away. She was still staring at the waiter, who was now calmly taking orders from another table as if the piano moment had been just another part of his shift. But inside she felt a mix of embarrassment and amazement. She had made him play as a joke to make her friends laugh. But what she had really done was uncover something extraordinary, something that no one in that restaurant would ever forget. She couldn't help but watch him closely as he moved between tables. His posture was relaxed, his smile genuine, but his eyes seemed distant, like someone who had seen and felt a lot more than he showed. She wanted to say something, to apologize maybe, but she didn't know how to start, so she just sat there, feeling small in a room where she had always felt superior. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager came out from the kitchen, looking slightly confused. He had heard the applause from the back and wanted to know what had happened. When he saw the waiter, he called him over with curiosity. "What was that all about?" he asked. The waiter smiled politely and said, "Just played a song, sir." The manager blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Played a song? You mean you played the piano?" "Yes," the waiter replied softly. "A guest asked me to." The manager looked around the dining area. People were still talking about it, some even trying to record short clips on their phones discussing how incredible the performance was. "Well," the manager said slowly, "I don't know what that was, but everyone looks impressed. Maybe we should have you play more often." The waiter laughed gently and shook his head. "I appreciate that, but I'm here to serve, not perform." Then he gave a humble smile and went back to work, leaving the manager shaking his head in wonder. Meanwhile, at the corner table, the wealthy woman finally gathered the courage to call him over. "Excuse me," she said softly as he passed by. He turned to her with his usual polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. She hesitated, her voice quieter than before. "I just wanted to say thank you. That was beautiful." He gave a small nod. "I'm glad you liked it." She paused, searching for words. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "You were amazing, truly." He looked thoughtful for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Then in a calm tone, he replied, "My mother used to be a music teacher. She taught me when I was young. I used to play in small events, but things changed. Now I just play when I get the chance." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her heart sink a little. She sensed there was a deeper story there, something about struggle, about lost dreams, but she didn't push for more. She just nodded, feeling humbled. For the rest of the evening, the atmosphere in the restaurant was completely different. Guests smiled at him, complimented him, even clapped again when he passed by their tables. People whispered his story to each other like a rumor spreading through the room. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about what the performance represented. He had reminded everyone, without saying a single proud word, that talent and worth aren't defined by uniforms or job titles. The piano had spoken for him, louder and clearer than any speech ever could. Later that night, when the restaurant was finally closing, the wealthy woman lingered at her table. Her friends had left, but she stayed behind, waiting until the last guests were gone. When the waiter came to clear the table, she looked at him again, this time with a gentle expression. "Listen," she began softly, "I owe you an apology. I wasn't being kind earlier. I didn't expect you to actually play. I thought it would just be a bit of fun. But you," she paused, struggling for words, "you showed me something special tonight. Thank you for that." He looked at her, his face kind. "It's okay," he said. "Sometimes life surprises us all." She smiled faintly, appreciating his grace. Then she reached into her purse and took out an envelope, placing it gently on the table. "This isn't charity," she said quickly. "It's appreciation. You gave us something priceless tonight. Please take it." He hesitated, unsure whether to accept, but her expression was sincere, so he nodded and thanked her quietly. As she left, she turned one last time to glance at the piano. It seemed different now, not just a piece of furniture, but a symbol of something deeper. Something she would remember for a long time. The next morning, as the restaurant reopened for brunch, people were still talking about the waiter who had played like a professional. A few regular customers even asked if he'd be playing again. Someone had uploaded a short video from the night before. It showed the waiter's hands gliding over the keys, the audience clapping, and the sound of that beautiful melody filling the room. Within hours, the video began spreading. Comments poured in from people saying how moved they were. Some shared their own stories of hidden talents and missed dreams. Others said the video reminded them to treat everyone with kindness and respect, because you never know what someone carries within them. When the waiter came to work later that day, the manager showed him the video on his phone. "You're going viral," he said with a grin. "People are calling you the waiter pianist." The waiter laughed, shaking his head. "That's unexpected." "It's more than unexpected," the manager said. "It's inspiring. I think people needed to see something like this, something real, something pure. Throughout the day, customers kept asking to meet him, take pictures, or simply thank him for the music. He remained humble, always responding with a quiet smile and the same line. I'm just happy to share what I love. That evening, the wealthy woman returned once more. This time, she didn't come with her friends or expensive jewelry. She came alone, dressed simply, almost unrecognizably. When she saw him, she walked up and said, I just wanted to see you again. And to tell you, your music didn't just move me. It made me think about the kind of person I want to be. He looked surprised but touched. That's kind of you to say, he replied. I realized something, she continued. Sometimes we look at people and think we already know their story. But we don't. You reminded me of that. You reminded everyone. He nodded quietly. Thank you. That means a lot. They talked for a while, not as a rich woman and a waiter, but simply as two people. She asked about his dreams, and he admitted he had always wanted to perform again, maybe even teach someday, but life had taken him in another direction. Before leaving, she said, You deserve more than this. I hope the world gives you that chance. The waiter didn't know then that her words would soon come true. The video would keep spreading, reaching musicians, producers, and even philanthropists who believed in giving hidden talents a platform. His life was about to change forever, but in that moment, all he knew was that for the first time in years, people saw him not as someone serving them, but as someone who had something beautiful to give, and perhaps that was enough. That night after closing, he sat at the piano once again, the lights dim, the restaurant empty. He played quietly to himself, letting the melody drift through the silence. It was peaceful. It was honest. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that the world had finally heard him. Not just his music, but his story. The days following that night felt different. The restaurant that had always been a quiet, hidden gem of the city was now buzzing with new faces. People came not only for the food, but to see him, the waiter who played the piano like a dream. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration. Every evening, he'd walk through the doors of the restaurant, put on his apron, and quietly take his place at the tables. Yet in the eyes of everyone around him, he was no longer just another face in uniform. A week after the performance, the manager called him into the office. The man was holding his phone, grinning from ear to ear. You might want to see this, he said. On the screen, the video from that night had exploded. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People were writing messages like, this gave me chills, and never judge someone by their job. Some even said the story restored their faith in kindness and humility. The waiter stared at the phone, speechless. He didn't know what to say. For so long, he had played only for himself, in his small apartment, in quiet moments after long shifts, never imagining the world would one day listen. I guess people needed something real, the manager said softly. And you gave them that? The waiter smiled, humbled, still unsure what to think. He wasn't used to attention. For him, playing the piano was never about showing off. It was about peace. It was the one thing that made him feel free even when life wasn't easy. As the days passed, more people reached out. Journalists wanted to interview him. Talent scouts wanted to meet him. And local TV stations called the restaurant asking if he could appear on their morning shows. At first, he hesitated. He didn't see himself as anyone special. But the manager encouraged him, saying, You've inspired people. Maybe it's time to tell your story. When he finally agreed to appear on a small local show, he sat quietly beside the host, dressed in his simple black uniform. The host asked him about that night, about how it all began. He smiled modestly and said, It wasn't planned. A guest asked me to play and I just played. I didn't expect anything. I was just doing what I love. The host leaned forward. Do you realize how many people your story has touched? He paused for a moment and replied, I'm grateful if it helped someone feel something good. Sometimes life doesn't give you the chance to shine, but it doesn't mean your light isn't there. Those words, spoken quietly, without pride or exaggeration, spread across social media again. People began calling him the man who made humility beautiful. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. He received a call from a well-known music foundation in the city. They had seen his story and wanted to invite him to perform at a charity concert. The event would feature trained musicians, but they wanted him to close the show. not as a waiter but as an artist. When he hung up, he sat in silence, staring at the piano keys in the restaurant. His hands trembled slightly. He hadn't played for a large audience since his early 20s, back when he dreamed of becoming a performer before life took him down another road. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was grand, filled with people dressed in elegant clothes, the kind of crowd he used to serve but never imagined performing for. He wore a simple black suit borrowed from a friend, not wanting to outshine anyone, just to be himself. Backstage, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He thought about everything that had led him here, the long shifts, the tired nights, the quiet mornings when he doubted himself. Then he thought about the wealthy woman who had unknowingly given him this chance. He didn't resent her anymore. In some strange way, she had helped him rediscover himself. When his name was announced, he walked onto the stage to soft applause. The lights were bright, and for a moment his heart raced. But then he saw the piano, polished, waiting, and everything else faded away. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. The sound was rich, emotional, full of life. It wasn't just notes anymore. It was every dream he had ever held, every hardship, every bit of hope that had kept him going. The audience sat in complete silence, drawn into the melody that seemed to speak directly to their hearts. By the time the final note rang out, people were already on their feet. The applause came like a wave, thunderous, endless. Some had tears in their eyes. He stood and gave a small bow, overwhelmed by the love in the room. After the show, several musicians came to congratulate him. A well-known pianist told him, "You have something special. Technique can be taught, but heart can't, and you have that." Soon after that night, offers began pouring in. Music schools invited him to give guest performances. A small recording company offered to sponsor his first solo album, and even though fame was never something he chased, it found him anyway. But through all of it, he stayed grounded. He still came by the restaurant sometimes, helping out or just greeting old coworkers. The piano in the corner remained where it was, polished, untouched, almost sacred now. On quiet evenings, he'd sit there again, playing softly as people dined, not for fame or attention, but for love of the music itself. One evening, months later, the same wealthy woman returned to the restaurant. This time she wasn't surrounded by friends. She came quietly, dressed simply, and when she saw him sitting at the piano, she froze. He looked up, recognized her, and smiled gently. She approached him after he finished playing. "I don't even know how to begin," she said softly. "I came here to say thank you. Not just for that night, but for what came after. Your story changed me. It changed how I see people, how I treat them." He smiled warmly. "I'm glad it did. Life has a way of teaching us through small moments." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You taught me that everyone carries something beautiful inside them. You just have to look a little closer." They talked for a while, not about the past, but about the present, about how strange and beautiful life could be. When she left that night, she looked lighter, almost peaceful, as if she had made peace with herself too. Over time, the waiter-turned-pianist became a quiet legend in the city. People spoke of him not just for his talent, but for his humility. He gave free performances in hospitals and community centers, playing for people who needed comfort. He taught children who couldn't afford lessons, often refusing payment. For him, music wasn't about success. It was about connection. In interviews, whenever people asked him what success meant, he always said the same thing. "It's not about being seen. It's about being heard for who you truly are." Years later, that restaurant still kept the same piano. Guests would often ask about it, and the staff would tell them, "That's the piano where it all began." Some nights he'd return quietly, sit down, and play a soft tune. The staff would pause to listen, smiling, because they knew they were witnessing something special every single time. And in that same city, people still told the story about the night a rich woman made a joke, and a humble waiter answered with music that touched the world. The story spread far beyond the walls of the restaurant. It became more than just a viral video or a moment of surprise. It became a reminder, indeed, that kindness, humility, and talent can exist anywhere, even in the most ordinary places.